Hello there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast, part of the 1517 podcast network of shows. You can go to 1517.org/podcasts to see all of our shows there. If my internal clock is correct, which it usually isn't, then we're currently running a podcast survey on the 1517 podcast network. All that is like a 20-question multiple choice survey that podcast listeners can use to give the network some feedback, some direction, give us an idea of what kind of shows you like listening to, what on the 1517 podcast network is your favorite, what kind of formats we should invest in, or the kinds of things that help us produce and edit the shows so that they are an enjoyable experience or useful for you. So you can go ahead and fill that out now. That would be a great help to us as we continue to develop and produce the 20-something shows on the 1517 podcast network. Podcasting is, in my opinion, a great media because not only has it grown so much and it allows for the space of free conversation, but it's also unique in the fact that podcasting apps and services can't really collect that much data on the listener. There are limitations to the data sent back to podcasters like us, and I love that from a privacy and perspective for people when so much digital media is trying to invade and take as much information as it possibly can from you and sell it to other people. But the downside to that is that I don't have a lot of data. So what we're asking you to do is willingly tell us some things about yourself, tell us some things about your listening habits, and if you're willing to share that with the 1517 Podcast Network, we would love to hear what you have to say in our podcast survey.
We promise not to sell your data to an AI.
I don't make promises like that. Maybe the service I used to capture it is AI. I don't know.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Don't admit that out loud.
We don't know. No, we're not selling data. 1517 has no reason to sell information. Although maybe we should. Okay, so no, we won't sell data. We're good like that. We have a very interesting topic today, Bruce. The way you phrase the second half of the question is very...
You either like or hate my phrasing, but go ahead.
It's very confusing to me. I've heard... The only other people I've ever heard use this phrasing are other... In the Lutheran world, are other Lutheran brethren. So this must be...
This isn't coming out of the Lutheran world. This is
okay.
Evangelical world.
So I've never heard this phrase in Lutheranism.
Bob Dargitz used to use it with me, Jeff, and Josh Rosenthal all the time.
No, not the iron sharpens iron part. It's the second half of this question. So our topic today is iron sharpens iron, the good and bad of, quote, accountability. Now, it's that word that I've heard, but I've never really experienced in Lutheranism. So you'll have to tell us what accountability is. I know there's accountability buddies and accountability groups, but I'm not sure
what's an accountability buddy.
And somebody who's your accountability person.
They're accountable.
Yeah, Buddy. That's a new one for me.
But Bruce, you're gonna have to put this one all in one package for me.
Yeah. So this is sort of a dated question on one hand, but that's one of the reasons why I find it provocative, because you don't hear about it so much now. And I find that curious because it was such a big thing in the 90s. So what happened? Did people's values change? Did their theology change? Is it still alive and well, but under a new guise? So in the 90s and into the 2000s, a big thing within evangelical circles was accountability and accountability groups. And that meant that you would find another friend or whatever, or sometimes it was a group of friends, usually geared towards men, by the way, but not always. And this happened in youth groups all the way up to men in retirement age. And it was, you get together and you talk about the sins that you're struggling with or have, committed, and you agree to hold each other accountable to check in on that person and to make sure that they are essentially improving or trying to improve or staying, however you're going to word it, or staying away from the temptation or whatever. And this was thought, to be an expression of the meaning of the phrase iron sharpens iron, among other verses, but that was sort of the proof text verse that, well, what iron sharpening iron means is it means helping a person become a more moral follower of Jesus. We have to be the light of the world. And if we have to be in, but not of the world. And so we need to let our light shine. And that means we need to be different, set apart and holy. And that means, so you can see where it all goes. And so accountability groups came out of an anxiety of being polluted by the culture, while at the same time having a sort of more older view of virtue, pursuing virtue in a sense. So it kind of mixed those two things. But then it also brought it in with evangelical works righteousness to an extent as well. So what would happen sometimes in accountability groups was if you went to a bunch of accountability groups, after a while, you weren't really hearing good news about your sins being forgiven. You were just continually hearing about how bad you were and were missing the mark and needed to try harder. So now you don't hear much about them. And I find that curious. So what happened? Why?
It might just be called something different.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe they're called something different, but has social media destroyed the need for them? Or people just not interested in that anymore? So that was what provoked the question. But there's a lot. I mean, we could obviously talk about the theology behind it, or
I'm curious that Adam was like the least phased by this question when I put it in the thing. So Adam, you're obviously sort of like familiar with.
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, that's fair. But Adam, you were
swimming 5 miles.
You were completely unfazed by this question. So you've got some experience here.
I do actually. I've been a part of an accountability group or two in my life.
Really?
Do you remember the group or movement called the Promise Keepers?
I do. Yeah.
Yep.
So back in my evangelical / charismatic phase, this would have been in the 90s. I went to a Promise Keepers because I was at the church I was at. I encouraged all the men to attend, and I was a young man going with all these older men who were married and had kids and whatnot. Promise Keepers, and they set up, if I remember the chronology correctly, an accountability group afterwards. And so I went for a little while, and usually it was like a Bible study, and then there would be this group, this sharing of what you're struggling, like just as you described, Bruce, what you're struggling with, whether it's treating your wife well or, and this is the 90s. So thinking back, I'm like trying to figure out like, how did this all happen? But guys would talk about pornography and alcohol and so on. But then I think back, I'm like, pornography? I don't know if there was the internet back then.
No, it was dedication in the 90s. You had to go buy that stuff.
Yeah, I guess. But
the guys who were struggling with that were working for it.
Yeah, you were working for it.
So there was, like, just as Bruce described, it was this, we're going to hold each other accountable to help each other get better in whatever arena we feel we need to get better in. And the downside, we'll start with that, is, as Bruce described, is that there was no room, and this was a charismatic church, so they're not used to like confession and absolution in any, however that might work out. The upside, though, is that it was a time for guys to get together, a dedicated time to get together, and it was kind of a forced friendship, I guess. But I don't know if I've not heard of them as of late until very recently, and I'm not going to mention names, but I know people who are part of what looks like an accountability group. I've not participated, but it's just called a men's group.
I just talked to some people the other night who are very much a part of what they call an accountability group.
Yeah. Are they evangelicals or Lutherans?
Yeah, they're evangelical.
So these are Lutherans.
Oh,
that are doing it. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
Well,
I'm not. I'm sorry. I said I was done talking, but I'm not fazed so much. I would be concerned if I was a part of one where there's no forgiveness spoken, no absolution spoken if they're confessing your sins to your brothers. But
it's fine.
I don't think it's a bad thing for guys to get together and talk about things, as long as it's not hokey and forced. And
it's likely a good thing, right?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, like Adam mentioned, in evangelicalism, it's the closest thing to confession, so it's very powerful.
I've been trying to get Scott to be my accountability partner for years.
It's called an accountability buddy. Accountability buddy.
We get together over Zoom and like put our foreheads up against the screen, and
it would go.
There is some
south quickly.
Interesting coming off
accountability buddy.
I don't know how it. I don't even know why I know about accountability buddies, but I think it must be like something online.
It's because his generation always has to give
everything a word,
a meme name to it.
Everything.
Yeah. Anything you can think of that's just like a normal thing gets a meme name.
Yeah. But we're just a generation of funny people. The thing that's good about this that I would not have been like, I don't know, like a while ago, my gut reaction to this would have used to be bad. But I run into more and more men my age who, for whatever reason, there's a whole lot of complicated reasons. I think starts with bad relationship with their dad, or at least one that is not, where no serious conversations outside of how you doing at school. Sports, or
how was your day, son? Pat on the head.
Have you seen the not to meme, but the dad walking into his son playing computer games where he goes, "Are you winning, son?" And he looks in the door and then, closes the door. It's like that's the relationship. So it starts with that. And then from there, don't craft any of the friendships that I think we talked about in our friendship episode. And so I've recently had a very difficult conversation with somebody like this who, just flat out said there's nobody I have serious conversations with.
Well, this is a real thing, and this is why we did that the friendship book.
And I do think continuing to tell people, well, make friends isn't always a solution. And so my gut reaction to it now would be, well, it's interesting if people are actually there talking about serious things that they didn't have an outlet for. That's good. I do worry about that, this confession and absolution aspect to it. It seems like that would be the danger, right? Is it becomes a progressive sanctification thing that talks, where Christianity becomes about the improvement, and whether or not you're genuinely faithful is tied to the improvement. And thus I could see it becoming a mechanism for burning people out of the church. And I would guess we have listeners who might write in and say that, one of the reasons they're Lutheran now in their sort of journey would be a burnout from a group that was about accountability and stuff. I would be zero surprised about that kind of thing. But I do wonder if there is a way to capture some of that while including something, very uniquely evangelical in the real sense of the word, in the Reformation sense of the word, where a key component of hearing people's sins is actually forgiving them.
I think this is a lot like, well, it's been a long time since we did this, but not too long ago, maybe more than a year, though, we did that episode on Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah. I think that was, about a year ago.
And, because I was critical of him, and so Adam wanted to do a show on him to ask me why I was critical of him. So we did that. And it's, for me, this is the same reason. Like, I think that there's every...
That's what it is.
Well, the funny thing is, back then he was very much focused on still like the 12 rules stuff, which is life improvement kind of thing. Now it seems like every time I see a clip of him, he's talking about transsexuals. So,
or theology, which is really weird.
Yeah. So I'm talking like the old Jordan Peterson. There's real potential to this, and there's a real need for this kind of thing on the civil level. Like, there is a real need right now for men to come together with other men and even be held accountable for their actions, for their lack of action, for their, for their pornography addictions, all these things. This is real, and necessary. And the closest thing that you would have to that would be sort of a real friendship. But since so few real friendships actually exist now, and that they're all, acquaintances modeled after online relationships where you show the good and hide the bad, and then once you see some bad, kind of unfollow. That I actually think this kind of thing would be really helpful in the civil realm. It's just that no matter what we do as Christians, we always take it over to Jesus, right? It goes from, this would really help you in your life here and now with your friends, with work, with keeping your house together, with your wife, kids, whatever. And this would really help you be more like Jesus. And all of a sudden, you're down this rabbit hole where if somebody did trust in Christ alone for their salvation, you're now telling them to trust in something else in some way, shape, or form. And it gets theologically dangerous, which is why I think this is such a hard thing to pull off in the church. And I think it's something we should, to some degree, try to pull off, but it's a difficult thing to pull off in the church, because the appeal for people to go, even in the church, to be, the elder statesman accountability partner that's got it all figured out, and to have a younger accountability buddy, is that you've got it all figured out, and that's an appeal to the law, inside you, that you think you're making it, and then your appeal to the other person is going to be the law, that if they just follow it, they can be like you and make it too. And so no matter what you do, there's a portion of just telling them what their itching ears want to hear, and thing. I mean, everybody that comes and says, I need an accountability partner because I want to do better, wants to hear all of the ways in which they can be better, like, quote unquote, like Jesus. And I think it's the same thing with Promise Keepers. Like, the idea of Promise Keepers is awesome. The reality of it is a little theologically scary. And so this is a struggle.
What do you I'm just asking for clarity. So, like, you would say it's a good idea to have, just in general, that there's like accountability and it's good for the culture, but that Christians have to go to Jesus. But then, we often fail at that. So, would you advocate then for groups or not?
What I'd advocate for is like the old fraternal societies that were, disconnected from word and sacrament ministry to some degree, where Christians just got together as Christians. And not necessarily got together just to make Jesus smile on them from heaven. They got together and they did things within society, and I think to some degree they were friends and could come to each other. And I do think that anytime I teach this, I say, the difference between me getting together with a bunch of non-Christian friends and telling them all my problems, and me getting together with my Christian friends and telling them all my problems, should be that in one of those scenarios, the conversation is going to start with a forgiveness of sins, and the other, it's going to start with advice. Right? Now, if I'm just going for advice, I'll tell you what, I've got a couple of non-Christian buddies that I've had for 20 plus years that give great advice about living life, because their life is lived with sort of this amorphous idea that I'm not sure I believe in Jesus, but I just know that if I do my best to be a good person, maybe it'll all work out in the end. So they actually, in general, are pretty good people, outwardly. And so you go to them and you get advice. It's pretty good advice. If I go to a Christian, I don't mind advice from a Christian. I give tons of advice. I'm an advice man. I love advice, like my mojo. But at the end of the day, Caleb just shakes his head. But at the end of the day, that conversation should start if somebody is actually saying, man, I'm really addicted to pornography and it's really affecting my marriage. I notice that I don't want to have sex with my wife as much and we're fighting all the time. there's lots of advice to give there, but there's first the forgiveness of sins, right? You're committing some pretty serious sins that you just confessed to me, and you need to know that you're forgiven for them. Okay, and then let's talk about, some strategies to really at least slow down, the progression of these sins. So, but it's got to start that way. Otherwise, why not just go see a secular therapist or a secular person who specializes in
Advice giving.
even specific advice giving too, like how to knock a porn addiction or how to be better at managing money, or boy, my dad never really had a good relationship with my mom. I don't really know how to talk to my wife. Somebody that specializes in that.
Best angle for a rear naked choke or something like that.
What?
Lots of advice to go around.
I don't even know what that is. It sounds gross.
As we kind of sit and think about it, it's interesting because I think there are certain people who could pull this off, like heading off this group, who are, not to pat him on the back too big, but I think if you see we're at a church and you put my dad in charge of something like this here, you could probably pull it off. You could probably have somebody who structures it so that it opens with something like confession, absolution, and has a Bible study that is really geared towards that, and then really does allow people to have space and friendships and somebody to confess to, etc. But that would be my worry about making it a rule, because or something that all churches should have, because I'm pretty confident not every church has somebody who can hold this off.
Well, it's foreign. It's the thing is just foreign. Advice is normal. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness is foreign. And this is just the reality. I remember
that could be your tagline for this group that Caleb's put in charge of.
I should.
Advice is normal. Forgiveness is, what is it? Foreign.
Foreign. I wonder
beautiful.
if I could really market it.
I should put it on the church marquee.
That's the book.
Yeah, I think it's egoistic, actually.
But I remember years ago when I first wrote Being Dad, I was getting a lot of gigs, not just on fatherhood, but on masculinity and that type of thing. And I was at church near LA, and I kind of did the friendship mentorship portion of Being Dad, where because Being Dad is hard in a big room. It's a great talk, but it's hard in a big room because so many people have had bad dads and so many people have no dads. And so you always have to there's always an angle at the end that's like, what if I had a bad dad, or what if I had no dad, or what if I was a bad dad, right? That type of thing. And so I remember this, part of that is me just looking at the guys in the room and saying, the older guys in the room, and saying, if you want to keep some of these younger guys in your church, one of the really good things would be for you to just sort of try to get to know them outside of church and be a, quote unquote mentor to them. And the one guy, a crusty old dude, raises his hand and he's like, well, what makes you think I can be a mentor? I wouldn't even know what to say. And I'm like, well, I know that'd be hard originally. I go, but what if you just, I pointed to some young guy. So what if you just took that young man over there out to coffee once a month and bought him a $7 breakfast? Good luck finding that in California. And, just said to him, hey, what do you do for a living? And when he told you what he did for a living, what if you sort of found a way to be both absolving and encouraging and said, I'm sure that's a hard job. It sounds like you work really hard at it. That's something I've never done and I'm not sure I could do. I'm proud of you for doing it. Like that type of thing goes a long way, but it's completely foreign, right? And eventually that young guy is going to tell you something, whether you were good at this with your own children or not. He's going to tell you something. If you tune your ears to hear the confession, he's going to say, I really messed up with my first girlfriend and now I'm struggling. She probably could have been the one I could have made a life with, but I didn't think she was X, Y, or Z. And now they're looping in this, all right? They're round and round and round. Well, you could just start giving advice for finding the next chick. Or you could say, I'm sure it's been hard and that you're forgiven, for that mistake, for that sin, for that whatever. And it really gives people, I mean, the reaction to that kind of thing is shocking because it's so foreign to them. And you're really giving somebody the forgiveness to sort of move on, to kind of break out of this looping cycle that they're in. I think you'd be shocked the amount of young men who maybe had a good thing going in college, it broke off, and now they find themselves later in life. And boy, the women that they run into that they want to start a life with are not the same as the ones they ran into in college, and they just kind of loop and loop and loop around this, and they're stuck. They don't know how to move on. Now, that's not a huge sin, but there was something there that was hard that they went through that they feel guilty about. And it's just it can be little stuff like that too. How did I get on this?
Well, I was
just, well, maybe my experiences were different. And Adam, I don't know what your experience was. Maybe you could speak into this too. But when I was in some of these groups in the 90s, I didn't find that they often led to advice so much as they led to, like, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to check in with you. I'm sure that other people have, like, abusive stories of people manipulating and controlling them and stuff. But, like, I was in more than one over the 90s into the 2000s. And I didn't feel like the groups were getting together to strategize, because, like, my experience was a lot of guys, unless there's a significant age difference, like you're talking about, Scott, where it's like a young person and an older person, if you're sort of within the same age structure, like, you don't really like want to hear advice from someone else because they're in the same part of life as you. So you're kind of like, well, what do you think you have it all figured? Like, we're the same generation. Like, what are you talking about? So I didn't find that the groups led to advice. I found they were more, and this wasn't in the Lutheran Brethren, actually, this was in Assemblies of God that I experienced it, but I found they were more pietistic in the lowercase p of that, like more devotional, more about, well, I'm going to pray for you. Adam, was your experience more leaning that way, or was it more leaning towards, like, let me help you come up with a way to stop this addiction or whatever?
The former, mostly.
Yeah.
I never belonged to one.
Yeah.
The way to help or to fix things was, the laying on the hands and praying over you, and asking God to cast out the.
Now, don't you think there's another kind of risk with this, which is, like continuing to petition God to work in ways outside the means of grace, which may or may not result in that, right? So that, like, I'm imagining a different kind of brokenness, which is I had somebody praying for me every week or every day, and nothing changed.
And still, I'm
prayer,
normal schmuck that I was.
So,
2 years.
God
ago.
doesn't want, God doesn't want me, or I mean, that's always the risk with the high piety kind of churches, right?
Yeah, I think, though, I don't disagree at all. I just would add that any time anyone wants to help someone, whether that be spiritually or practically or emotionally, whatever, there's always a risk you're going to just mess it up. And so the question becomes, like, do you still take the risk? And that's sort of where I'm swirling above in our conversation. Like, it would be nice.
I'm a good Lutheran. If there's doctrinal risk, we just find a way to not try anything. That's,
Right. And I think that turtle mentality of, like, just go in and spell.
Hey, you could teach somebody a wrong doctrine, so just don't do anything.
Don't do anything. Just stop.
And so that turtle kind of mentality of, or ostrich in the ground mentality, will keep you apparently safe and pure, but you're just going to sit there and be eaten by the lion or die. I mean, it's not the way to go out into the world. This is a larger issue. Actually, I talked about Adam about this briefly this week when we had a conversation, which is, this is my own opinion, but, like, why do we have biblical wisdom, the wisdom books in the Bible? Well, one of the reasons I think for that is, if you're going to go out and do ministry, you're going to have to take risks. And what I mean by risks is you might get it wrong and you might sin. If you're so afraid that if you do something wrong, it'll lead to a sin, and so therefore I'm not going to do anything at all. To me, that's the definition of the guy who buries his talents in the ground, who just doesn't want to, it's a works righteousness actually at work, because it's like, well, I don't believe in the forgiveness of sins. I'm not going to go out and invest these talents because I might sin, and then God will be mad at me, so I'm going to avoid sin, so I'm not going to take any risks. So I think wisdom exists to help us navigate those gray spaces, and it gives us the ability also to repent when we get into our attempts to try to do what we're called to, and we realize, oh, I screwed that up. I was too gracious there. I should have called that out. You know what? I was too harsh there. I should have been more gracious. We learn that in doing ministry, and we have to be okay taking those moral risks. Of course, I'm not saying if you know it's morally wrong, don't do it. I'm just saying there's so much you don't know until you actually have to reach out and try to help your neighbor, and that's going to probably put you in a lot of places of temptation. And you're not always going to do that right, and that's okay. Part of wisdom is you have the forgiveness of sins wash over you, and then you learn, okay, I gotta do this differently. But I do see a lot of churches that just aren't willing to do ministry in a gray space because I think it's a works righteousness that's at work.
I think that there's I really think there's a need for some of this. I mean, the current data and surveys on this kind of thing would say you don't even need to say you think there's a need for this. There is a need for this in the church for some finding ways to encourage, and I think specifically men to get together, and you don't want to force friendships, but to create connections with one another, because there's just, time and time again, we're just told how alone people feel in a world where they're more connected than they've ever been in human history. And it's shocking, how lonely really everybody feels. And so and that they feel like that they're not making friends that have any commonality to them. When I do the friendship lecture, you can give the data where men, and geez, I haven't done this lecture in a while, so it's from a while ago, and I'll bet you it's worse now, but it's something like only 8% of men, which we call in the young adult group, sort of having graduated from college, but not in their late 30s yet, so the 25 and over group, only 8% of them would report that they have even one friend with whom they could share something serious going on in their life. And to define that, I always say, you're talking about the person that you would call when your dad dies, or the person you would call when you think you're feeling like you're going to divorce your wife, that you have maybe not even one person outside of your immediate family that you feel like you could talk to about that. And then in the church, we're like, well, why does everybody have a therapist? Why is everybody going to see a therapist once a week? Well, because they're paying for it. They're paying for it. They're paying somebody to be this person that they're not finding in their everyday life. That's why. I mean, in general, some people go to therapists because they're actually struggling with,
I think there might be a little chicken and egg there as well.
There might be, but at the same time, I mean,
therapy culture became an expertism where friends.
Well, we did a show on this.
Friends shouldn't be the ones to talk about that stuff with you because they're not experts.
Well, I know that the only therapist I need is my Calabilly buddy, Adam.
I was just thinking of how when I have struggles, existential crises, I call you and you just make fun of me for being a dork, and that pretty much cleans it up.
That's my method. I'm writing a book on it.
Scott Trino.
It works with you. You got to roll. You got to go with the flow. That works with you. Somebody else calls you. It's maybe a different thing.
There is an advantage to a professional relationship with a counselor in this specific way. Yes, they're knowledgeable, so they know patterns about specific ways people think. That's nice. But I think the real advantage is sometimes there's too much to risk with a friendship or a spouse. You're just so emotionally connected. You need that completely outside trustworthy, and you are paying for it, but you're paying for someone who's, going to keep it secret and is going to speak into it and is completely objective. So there's an advantage to that. But to your point, Scott, I agree that a lot of what traditionally was done in friendship is being outsourced to experts at a high cost. And that I also would say, and this goes back a little bit to what we talked about last time, but what people want out of a friendship, I think, has gotten, how can I say this? People say they want friends, but do they really want people who are going to tell them they're wrong?
No, they don't. And
that's what I'm saying. So the idea of like friendship has changed as well.
Yeah.
Although people drop their friends if their friends are actually like, can you believe he told me or she told me I can't do this?
Let's roll with this a little bit though. So you said that your therapist has confidentiality, right? Yeah. So let's say, and I'm not, just for clarification for all those people out there that can't stand this, I'm not, I never would.
Don't use yourself in an analogy. I'm just like...
It's more rhetorically effective when you use yourself.
Use Joe Schmo.
Well, that's not as rhetorically effective.
Okay.
So let's pretend, which is utter pretending here, that I am being unfaithful to my wife. Okay. And it's happening, and I'm doing it irresponsibly too. Like there's probably not a responsible way to do this, but I'm really use your imagination. I'm throwing caution to the wind here, right? And I tell my friend Adam, listen, man, I'm doing this stuff, but man, you can't tell anybody. Well, if Adam is actually my friend, not only will he maybe that he wasn't even a confession at that point. Maybe he withholds absolution at that point because I'm not confessing. I'm just, bragging or doing whatever. If he's my friend, and if he's a friend that cares not just about me, but about my sort of larger situation, which would include my wife and my kids and my family and my grandkids, he's going to look at me and say, listen, as your friend, I will do whatever I can to help you stop this and get your life in order. But if this doesn't stop, I am going to tell your wife, because you are putting her at risk and you're putting your family at risk. That's what a friend does. A friend doesn't just sit there and go, oh yeah, man. Yeah. No, I won't tell anybody. I would never tell anybody. We're bros. That's not a friend. That's not a friend in that same way. A friend kind of defined, like we did not too long ago, is somebody that helps you be quote unquote more virtuous, right? And we just say that in one of our last shows. It was a different show that I was on. I did a couple of podcasts last week. Sorry, they all blend together for me. And this is the reality. If I go tell my therapist though, and I say you can't tell anybody, even if it's putting my wife at risk, emotionally, physically, whatever, and I say you can't tell anybody, my therapist is gonna be like, you're right, I can't, and I won't.
I
don't like that about that relationship. I don't think that's helpful.
From the clergy relationship, though.
Because that clergy is going to tell you to stop.
Yeah, but the clergy can't tell. They can't.
That bugs me about that too. I'm not clergy though.
Yeah,
I'm not clergy though. So there are a couple reasons people often ask me why I didn't end up going through with being a pastor, and not that I think it's. I'm not taking a stand here on whether or not clergy confidentiality and confession is right or wrong. I'm not taking a stand with it. So, again, people listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying I struggled with it.
Use yourself in the analogy.
For peace sake, man. All of this like mamby-pamby stuff makes everything just mamby-pamby.
Yeah.
There was a nice place, New Jersey, at one point called Mamby Pamby's. Believe it or not.
Well, yeah. I don't know. There are some things, where you're putting other people.
I think, Bruce, the clergy can at least attempt in a way that the therapist can't to do something. So you could say, we need to go talk to your wife right now.
Right.
Now, that person could fight you tooth and nail on that and say, no, we're not doing that.
And I'd say
that
you're
is
not confessing your sins.
That's an available option.
Your sins are retained. You're cut off from the sacrament. Now explain to your wife why you're cut off from the sacrament.
It's a viable option. I've seen that similar things done with Christian counselors.
Oh, maybe I'm not saying there's not a possibility of that. I have recently, and like for my dad's putting out this theoretical scenario. I have recently been part of an example, not me, but somebody else, that
Joe
Schmo, where the confidentiality of a therapist caused harm, and just didn't, and had there been an opportunity to say we're going to go and do X, and it wasn't a Christian therapist, I'll tell you that, it wasn't Christian counseling, but
yeah. So what would be? I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much because we only have 5 minutes left. But what would be in my example that I gave and clergy confidentiality? That is not confessing sin, especially if I'm saying you better not tell my wife. That's not confessing sin, and so there's really, no requirement on the part of the clergy then to absolve me, right? And then
I would have to think about that. I'm not sure I agree with that.
If they're blatant,
I don't see that
if I say this is happening, it's not going to change, don't tell my wife.
Oh yeah, okay, no, that I agree with.
Okay, so in that case,
I just mean that if someone's like deeply repentant, maybe I'm changing your analogy, but I'm not sure I am. Someone says they're deeply repentant, they come in to the pastor, but they don't like their wife, like they're married, that's why they're having the affair, and so they know what they're doing is wrong. They are sorry it's wrong. They're not ready. They're not ready yet to stop. They're just at the point of knowing it's wrong. They haven't, they're there they want the pastor to tell them they're wrong at that point. Like that's why they're really there. They know it emotionally, maybe that it's wrong and that it's practically wrong, but it hasn't sunk in fully enough. Like I don't see why the pastor shouldn't keep that confidentiality and continue to work.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the scenario I gave where you say, well, that's not a confession. You're not absolved. You're in open.
Would that person go in?
You're in open.
That's a fair question, Bruce. They might not. So it's all weirdly theoretical.
I know. I'm just thinking here, like,
go in if they didn't feel something.
I hate this. I shouldn't have brought up this. I hate this example because to me this is like Joe Schmo, not me. Joe Schmo saying, "Listen, pastor, like."
I use it.
I play Russian roulette every day. I know it's a sin. I'm emotionally at the point of telling you that it's a sin that I play Russian roulette every day, but I'm not at the point of stopping. Like, okay, well, let's work with you for another month. You play Russian roulette every day for another month, and let's just see how it goes until you're ready to stop.
What I'm pointing out is like Augustine's statement, give me charity, but not yet. So there's this repentant awakening, but you're just not able to do it yet, but you are moving towards the light. Like the Spirit is working on you because now, give me chastity, but you also have this flesh in you that still is saying, but not yet. And you're trying to work through that.
Yeah. I mean, the theoreticals are hard. But I mean, I've heard stories where that theoretical of the pastor saying we need to go do X is actually successful.
Right.
Well, not theoreticals, but real stories where we're going to go talk to your wife, or the one all right, your sins are forgiven. Let's now walk down to the police station, have happened and are not unsuccessful. And I think part of that is the emotional weight of the forgiveness of sins too. That vulnerability changes things. So I think in a real scenario versus sort of this theoretical, there's something different there. But I would say, Bruce, there's a fair point here about that this may also be a good reason as to why having a friendship or these groups where something like this might come out, where, yes, somebody isn't, the whole point of having an accountability buddy would be that they're not confidential. They're actually there to keep you accountable. Would be is interesting. And I think part of this could be not solved, but some of the other address would be, for men who realize that this is a problem, you may have the calling to actually insert yourself as a friend who's into somebody's life, or try to, right? Into, like if you're conscious of this issue in your church, like my dad said at this real example of being in a Talk to Being Dad, you may need to start like inviting somebody to breakfast.
Yeah.
And it needs to start with your own vulnerability. Like you can't be, St. Paul's warning of like, now I'll be a guide to the blind.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the wrong attitude.
Yeah.
You have to go into it going, this is going to be mutually beneficial, iron sharpening iron, if we were to use the proof text, and be a little vulnerable yourself and set the lead by example.
Part of it is saying, I need this.
With an elderly guy for many years. He passed away last year, and it was really hard for me. It was he had been in my life for 20 years, and we met almost every week for tea and coffee. He was Scandinavian. I had tea. He had coffee, and our conversations went kind of everywhere. Sometimes they were just like about the movies on TV. Other times they got really deep and theological. But the thing that surprised me is that, he was vulnerable too. We weren't sharing our deepest, darkest secrets, but we had a genuine, deep friendship. And the age difference was nice because I think I, to some extent, kept him young, and he gave me the wisdom of age, and we had a lot in common. It was great. It was really sad when he passed away, but he initiated that actually. He heard I liked history, and he was an engineer, and he hated history. And then later, after he retired, he started reading some history books on World War II, and he started to like history, but he didn't know much about it. And that was our first connection. He's like, "You studied history. Can we talk about World War II?" And then from there, things just developed. So I would just tell people, like, it does start with you though. Don't be a guide to the blind.
No, it starts with, I need this, not just they need this, and I can give it to them.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, this has been an interesting one. I came into this kind of blind on my thoughts, so because
I feel like people that think I'm an antinomian need to listen to this episode.
Probably.
I'm like, don't forgive that sin.
But any closing thoughts? I think for the purpose of your question, Bruce, it was sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I kind of like leaving it without the definitive. Now go start an accountability group, or no, don't have go do what you can to close the one at your church that's causing sanctification problems. I think kind of open ended.
If you have the riches of Christ's grace, go out and share them. People need each other, and they need Christ. And if you're a light bringing Christ to others, then be Christ to others and live in fellowship with others.
Awesome. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the Thank You Fellows podcast, part of the 1517 podcast network of shows. The 1517 podcast network exists to declare and defend the good news that you are forgiven and free on account of Christ alone. If you are enjoying these episodes of the Thinking Fellows podcast, you can help us out by following the link in your show notes below to both the donation and to the survey. If you can help us out in either of those two ways, that would be very beneficial to us. We hope you have a good rest of your week. We will catch you next time. Bye.